On February 24th, 1933, gangsters gunned down Dennis Ziegler here in Chicago. Ziegler died in his son's arms. He leaves behind 11 children and his wife, Edna.
I'm Lissa Morgans, and you're listening to Call Edna. Episode 15, The Attic, Part 2. Hello and welcome back to Call Edna, the podcast series where I'm solving my great-great-grandfather's Prohibition-era murder. We're jumping back into the attic to discuss all the newspaper reporting we found contained in my family's files. But first, I wanted to remind you again, if you want to call in and leave me a voicemail as to who you think murdered Bruce for our last episode, leave a voicemail on our tip line at 202-656-7391. Let's get into it. From my episode with Danny, there are a couple of things that were up for debate regarding our fact pattern that seemed pretty critical to our case, like the number of people we are looking for who committed the murder, the number of bullets fired, and were the streetlights turned off in Bruce's neighborhood and how. And today we're going to go through a variety of articles. The vast majority are ones I found in the attic, lovingly collected by family members over the past 90 years. There are also additional articles I found in my online research regarding misspellings of Bruce's name, and I'm going to remind you of the couple of articles we've already looked at so that we can get a whole picture of what exactly happened on February 24th, 1933. And I'm taking this route because of our lack of success with the police files. As you know, through my requests, we've been unable to access them. So using these accounts, I want to paint the best picture we can of what exactly happened the night of Bruce's murder. And to do that, I'm going to start with our original fact pattern, the Chicago Tribune, February 25th reporting, the first reporting I introduced you to in episode 1, the murder. The coverage by the Chicago Tribune on February 25th has been our baseline for Bruce's murder. That includes the cartoon picture of a man stepping out behind a tree and firing what looks like through a revolver or pistol, a bullet into the back of Bruce's head as he seemingly starts to fall. The getaway car, a sedan, sits in the background. And we received the following factual description of Bruce's death. Quoting, "As the car reached Ziegler, one man leaped out of it, ran over to the Union official, and fired 3 times from a pistol. All of the bullets took effect in Ziegler's body. As he fell, the man who had killed him ran back and rejoined his companions in the automobile." End quote. You may remember from my episode with Danny that I was convinced that the man was standing and hiding behind the tree, as in waiting behind the tree. And this is really important to acknowledge because that is not the account as it's presented here. Although that's what's depicted in the cartoon, he's seemingly stepping out from behind the tree after getting out of the car. And at some point in my mind, based on some other accounts I read, which we'll go through later, I developed the idea that he was hiding behind the tree, implying that he had been there for a period of time. And that's why it's so important this late in the investigation to go back through what we started with and build upon it. Because so many times as a lawyer, once I've had a greater understanding of the facts, and I go back and read the original accounts of what witnesses or others have said, I'm able to read and interpret the facts differently. Here, this late in our investigation, it seems clear as day that this account is saying that one person got out of the car, seemingly at the same spot where this tree was, stepped out and fired the shots into Bruce's body. In building from that account, I wanted to start with the other contemporaneous newspaper reporting in the 2 days after Bruce's murder. I'll note that the newspaper clippings that were kept by my family did not have the same record-keeping standard that Bruce set. Some of them are really clean and tidy, and others are more of a cut-and-paste job, but they're all the original newspapers, so I know they existed, and I'm going to build from there. Starting with this next account, a family member stamped the Daily News, which I presume is the Chicago Daily News, from February 25th of 1933. Quoting, Captain Daniel Gilbert, Chief Investigator for State's Attorney Thomas J. Courtney, today ordered the arrest of William E. Maloney, union business agent, and Sam Alex, gunman for Murray Humphreys, and a business agent in the Sheridan Baker Teamsters Union, following the assassination last night of Dennis B. Ziegler, father of 11 children and a foe of Maloney in the Hoisting and Portable Engineers Union. Ziegler was shot down near his home at 3716 North Tripp Avenue. End quote. So this account does not have a great factual depiction of what exactly happened, but I wanted to include it because it has this accounting that in fact the day after Bruce was murdered, the arrest of William Maloney and Sam Alex was ordered. An arrest was a term used back then not just to refer to arresting someone for committing the crime, but was used somewhat loosely to say arrest for questioning, which is what I'm gathering in context here they wanted from Maloney and Alex. But from further reporting, we're going to find out they never actually made it to the office, or if they did, the results of those conversations were covered up. Continuing on in the article, quoting, Gordon L. Hostetter, Executive Secretary, and Walter G. Walker, attorney for the Employers Association, revealed today that Ziegler had sought the aid of State's Attorney Courtney and themselves only a few days ago in his fight against Maloney. End quote. So we knew that Bruce had sought up help from other sources in the weeks and days leading up to his murder, but this is the first time I'm seeing an account where he actually spoke with an attorney and secretary for an employers association, in addition to his plea to State's Attorney Courtney for help that he didn't receive. From the Clinton Daily Journal on February 25th, 1933. This article I found through online search because it spells Ziegler's name wrong as Sigler with an S, but I'm going to pronounce it with a Z. Quoting, as he was walking within a block from his home, Ziegler was shot by 3 gunmen who apparently had been waiting for him. As he lay on the sidewalk, Dr. Howard Lagerquist rushed to his aid. Ziegler's lips moved as if he were attempting to tell who attacked him, but in his dying efforts were too feeble to be understood. End quote. So this is the first time we're seeing an appearance of the name of the eyewitness, Dr. Howard Lagerquist, who, as we know, lived at the address about a block away from Bruce's house, where he was shot on the night of his murder. And it's important to note that they say there are 3 gunmen. In the Tribune article, it only said companions with an S, and then I inferred that meant 3, because it was 1 gunman plus companions. So this is really naming that there are 3. And the account that Bruce tried to speak during his dying breaths is also something I've heard from family members. I heard that he tried to speak to David, his son, and when David ran down the street, I wouldn't be surprised if that's where he met with Lagerquist and Bruce as he lay there dying. The next article is from My Family Archive, and it's from an unknown publication, but stamped February 25th of 1933, entitled Kill Union Aid from Ambush. Quoting, Ziegler was waylaid and shot to death by 3 gunmen within a block of his house at 3716 North Tripp Avenue as he was walking home. The 3 waited for him in their automobile. As he walked by, they opened fire. As they raced away, Dr. Howard Lagerquist, near whose home the shooting occurred, rushed out and found Ziegler on the sidewalk. He said the union leader tried to talk but could not. Death came soon. End quote. So once again, we have 3 people, and going back to the article, quote, waited for him in their automobile. As he walked by, they opened fire, end quote. If you recall back to episode 1, when my grandmother spoke about how she thought this murder had happened, this more fit what she described. Essentially, people in a car driving by and firing off shots. But from all the other context clues we have, I'm pretty certain it was one person stepping out and not multiple people firing from inside a car, because it's pretty clear there were either 3 or 5 shots fired. And if there were 3 individuals firing from a car, I just doubt that there would be so few shots fired from 3 people. My guess is that it was the work of one person. And if we look back at the Tribune article, it says, quote, all the bullets took effect in Ziegler's body, end quote, which means all the bullets fired went into Ziegler's body. There weren't extra bullets going somewhere else, which also makes sense with the description of the murder as we know it, because it was at a very close range. This was not people from afar in a car, but definitely a close range back of the head shot. And again, this repeats the story that Bruce tried to speak to Dr. Lagerquist. We have one more account from February 25th, the day after Bruce was murdered. From the Belvedere Daily Republican, quoting, "Following a swift investigation of the murder of Ziegler, father of 11 children, orders were issued to arrest William E. Maloney, union business agent, and Sam Alex, lieutenant for Murray Humphreys, Chicago Public Enemy No. 1 and Teamsters Union business agent. Ziegler, it was revealed, had been in fear of death and asked protection from the state's attorney's office only a few days ago. Ziegler had been opposing Maloney in a hectic and sometimes bloody labor racketeering war. Blah, 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 blah. 3 gunmen shot him to death within a block of his house as he was walking home. The 3 killers escaped in the automobile, which carried them to the scene of the ambush. One of the gunmen ran over to Ziegler and fired 3 shots from a pistol as the Union official lay on the sidewalk. The assailant then joined his companions and the automobile sped away." So again, in this account, we're seeing the immediate finger pointing at William Maloney and Sam Alex. We also have another account that he asked for protection just days before he was murdered from State's Attorney Courtney's office. And once again, we have the phrase 3 gunmen shooting him to death. However, when they actually describe the details of how he was shot, it says one of the gunmen ran over to him and fired 3 shots from a pistol. So I think they're using the term gunman just to refer to their occupation and not the fact that all 3 fired shots on him, but that they were hired killers all in the car, one of which who got out and then fired the shots on Bruce. The thing that is slightly different about this one is it seems to imply that Bruce is on the ground already, as if they've startled him or he's fallen. Just logistically, I don't think that was the case, and I get the impression that Bruce was a very tough individual. I have to imagine if he saw the killers, his instinct wouldn't be to cower on the ground, but probably to try and run. And that's what we have the day after he was murdered. Because it was a Saturday, a weekend, there's additional coverage in the Sunday papers of what exactly happened in Bruce's murder. February 26, 1933, in an unknown publication but titled, "Rival Union Boss Ordered Arrested in Ziegler's Death." Quoting, "Captain Daniel Gilbert of the State's Attorney's Office, to whom Ziegler appealed 2 weeks ago for a police guard, questioned members of the union headed by Ziegler." End quote. This article didn't have a description of the details of how Bruce was murdered, but I wanted to put it in because it very clearly states that Bruce also went to Captain Daniel Gilbert 2 weeks before he was murdered asking for help. That is the second local request we have by Bruce, knowing that something was going to go on or maybe happen in his life. So 2 weeks prior to his murder, he asked the police for protection, and in days leading up to his murder, he asked the state's attorney's office for protection, and also spoke with the attorney and secretary at the Employers Association. I think that was particularly smart of Bruce, who was clearly having increased anxiety and thinking that he might be hunted down by the mob, that he spoke to other people, third parties, on the record about what was going on. The Tribune also had follow-up reporting on Bruce's murder on February 26, 1933, in an article entitled, "Ziegler's Widow Tells a 3-Year Reign of Terror." Quoting, "Ziegler was shot to death on Friday night by a lone gunman as he approached his home at 3716 North Tripp Avenue. Police inquiry indicated that labor discord had motivated the assassination, and this theory was aided by the widow's story." Further on in the article, cooperating with the police in the investigation is State's Attorney Thomas Courtney. He instructed his chief investigator, Captain Daniel Gilbert, to arrest Sam Alex for questioning. Alex is a reputed Capone gunman. Information on the hoisting engineer's fight has been supplied, I have to add the word "to," there's a typo, to Mr. Courtney by officials of the Employers Association, end quote. So again, we see the Employers Association. I had read this article when I started this podcast, and I didn't think anything of that part, the Employers Association. But now that we have that other article, I now know that Bruce had spoken to 2 individuals at the Employers Association about what was going on. And if you'll indulge me briefly, I was really curious about who the Employers Association was and who is Gordon Hostetter. And that's when I found out that the Employers Association of Chicago was a nonprofit based in Chicago from the early 1900s. At one point in time, Gordon was the executive director of this organization. I was really surprised to see that he was anti-union and that he was someone who Bruce contacted. However, it's a couple days before Bruce is murdered, and we know he's grown increasingly anxious and running out of options. And at this period of time, Gordon was going against labor racketeering. So I'm guessing that Bruce reached out to him as a last-ditch effort. And in fact, in 1929, Gordon co-wrote a book called It's a Racket. And this book is definitely a product of its time. But Gordon coins himself and the Employers Association as the group that coined the term racketeering. And so it's his perspective on what has gone on to date in Chicago about rackets and racketeering. Very few industries were free of racketeering in Chicago at this time, and I'll note that the Employers Association was no different. James W. Breen had to resign from his official position because he was involved in the battery racket in the 1920s. And as a fun aside, the University of Chicago has a South Side home movie project with home movies of Gordon and his family from the 1920s, if you're interested in looking at that kind of thing. And you can tell based on these videos that he was in a much higher tax bracket than the rank-and-file workers like Bruce. And from his book, It's a Racket, he describes the psyche of rackets and racketeers, and he does not hold back. Quoting, "Why are they at large? Why have they not met the ruthless justice and punishment they deserve? Because the racket protects its own. Because the criminal law is too often a weapon against society instead of a protection to it. Their punishment, if it comes at all, must come from the ghosts of murdered men that walk or ride at their side, between them and the sunshine, invade their thoughts and enter their dreams, coloring them with a blood that may be sleeping for a while which cannot die." End quote. Also from It's a Racket, describing a racketeer, quoting, "He gains power, he gains wealth. He uses this wealth and his racket organization for protective measures. Through them, he builds up defenses that are dangerous to attack and difficult to tear down. He interests himself vigorously and extensively in politics, both city, county, and state. His motives, however, are the reverse of patriotic. He can be counted upon for handsome donations to the campaign fund of his political party that he is chosen to dishonor by his membership and support. Invariably, he chooses it and supports it, only because its candidates and record offer the greatest promise for profit and protection to himself. His endorsement is that party's and that candidate's greatest disgrace." End quote. While there's a lot about Gordon and material in these books that clearly contradict with Bruce and his worldview, I can see where they also shared some similarity and why Bruce would have sought him out as a last resort for help against the racketeers. And back to our investigation. And in terms of the details, here we have lone gunmen, which I don't necessarily think is in discord with the other ones if we're referring to someone who actually fired the shots, and it doesn't mention the other people in the car. Another thing that I think is interesting is we have a lot of big names right off the bat mentioned for Bruce's murder. We've heard the names Courtney and Gilbert mentioned multiple times by this point, and it's only 2 days after the murder. And these are the two big shots in Cook County right now for the state's attorney and police department. And as we know, to an extent, as it relates to labor and the mob, they have a touch or more of a touch of corruption to them. We have one more article from February 26 of 1933 from the Pantagraph, quoting, "Officials Saturday began delving into interunion controversies for clues to the slaying Friday night of Dennis B. Ziegler, secretary of the local unit of the Hoisting and Portable Engineers Union. Sought for questioning were William Maloney, former business agent of the union, and Sam Alex, who holds the same position with the Teamsters Union. An inquest into Ziegler's death was continued to March 14th to allow authorities to study the protracted court battles between the victim and Maloney for control of the engineers' union. End quote. So again, we're getting confirmation that the reason why Maloney and Alex were being arrested was for questioning. And we're already seeing an indication of delay. The coroner's inquest into Ziegler's death is continued until March 14th to allow for more information. I also think that additional amount of time gives them less public pressure, potentially to produce a cover-up. The next article I see locally on him is from the Tribune almost a week later on March 7th of 1933, entitled Quiz Humphreys on Slaying of Union Official. Quoting, Murray Humphreys, public enemy number 1 on the hoodlum list, and Charles Fischetti, cousin of Al Capone, both out on bond pending their appeal of 1-year sentences for gun toting, were questioned at the Detective Bureau last night about the murder of Dennis H. Ziegler, labor official. Both denied any knowledge of the killing. Ziegler, 57 years old, secretary of the Hoisting and Portable Engineers Union, Local 569, was shot to death on February 25th near his home at 3716 North Tripp Avenue. End quote. So this is something that happens a lot in Bruce's murder story. You start to see articles saying that he died on February 25th or 26th, and it's very obvious he died on February 24th. And I'm really skeptical as to why Humphreys and Fischetti are called into questioning. When I originally read this, I thought it was because the police wanted to actually ask them about Bruce's murder. But now I'm not so sure. Now I'm wondering if they knew immediately who did it. And in the weeks after Bruce's murder, they're covering it up. And they're meeting with some of the highest members of Al Capone's gang, Humphreys and Fischetti, to let them know that no one's going to be charged for Bruce's murder. The next columns we have are from the 1940s. I have another one from the family archives in the attic. It's an unknown publication, and it appeared in something called Today's Murder Mystery column. Quoting, on the night of February 24th, 8 years ago, Ziegler got off a streetcar and started walking towards his home and his wife and 11 children. An auto in which several men were riding approached. One of the men jumped out, ran up to Ziegler, and fired a pistol 3 times into his body. As the Union leader fell, mortally wounded, the killer leapt back into the car, which sped away. End quote. This account is pretty much exactly what the Tribune reported the day after Bruce's murder, and is really lining up with what I think happened. We have another publication from an unknown date, but likely in the 1940s. Quoting, Captain Daniel A. Gilbert, investigator of the state's attorney's office, who ordered the questioning of a number of hoodlums and labor officials during his investigation, said, quote, we've never stopped working angles on this murder. The day after the murder, we received information that Sammy Alex was the killer. Alex fled the city after the slaying, and when he was taken into custody, none of the witnesses could identify him. All the streetlights were out when the murder was committed. We've obtained other information and we're going to stay with it. The murder was a professional job. End quote. This one stuck out to me because Gilbert is clearly saying that they questioned a number of hoodlums and labor officials during their investigation of Bruce's murder, and that Sam Alex fled the city after the murder, and then when he was brought back in, none of the witnesses could identify him. However, I have to, spoiler alert, let you know that from the reporting in the 1950s we're about to read, this simply can't be true. Or if it is true, none of it is recorded. From the little we know about the police file in William Mooney's 1958 article, there is no record of speaking with Sam Alex or a lineup regarding Sam Alex, and none of the eyewitness testimony indicates that this happened. So I don't know if this is fabricated by Gilbert or what exactly happened. But when he mentioned that Sam Alex fled and came back to the city and was taken into custody, it reminded me of something I read in the family files. If you'll indulge me and skip ahead to 1992, there was a letter in the family files addressed seemingly to no one and signed by someone named C, S-I-I, who I don't know the identity of, but is clearly one of Bruce and Edna's children. And it said the following, quote, "My father did have an ally in the state's attorney's office, and he put a detail of policemen at our house around the clock. This lasted until the new state's attorney Thomas Courtney came into office. The detail was removed, and in 2 weeks my father was killed, a half block from our house. The detectives told my mother, at the time, that Sammy Alex was probably the assassin, but that he was probably long gone, and of course, they told her that she wouldn't be able to afford the cost of trying to find him. From my understanding, the family was never informed that Sam Alex had been brought back into town, let alone brought into custody by the police, given some form of lineup, and then freed. So I'm incredibly skeptical of this account. And that brings us to the 1950s. The 1950s is when we have that breakout article written by William Mooney called Takeout Homicide File 1068 for New Murder Quiz Entry. Probe of Unionist Maloney brings life to old case. And it's stamped by my family member from February 15th of 1958 in the Daily News. I did pull the Daily News in microfilm and was not able to find it, but this article is very much real. I'm just not sure the exact date of it. But Mooney was able to get the police file and give us some information about what it contained. Quoting, "The files do not show any record of police having questioned Maloney, Lynch, Local 150 officials, or Sam Alex, another Union hoodlum, nor did the state's attorney's staff, who at that time often conducted separate investigations, ever question Maloney, who took a Florida vacation." End quote. So there is nothing contained in the police file that represents what Captain Gilbert is saying. And furthermore, my theory that there was a fix going on starting on February 26th is starting to gain some legs. Because another part of that reporting was that they needed additional time so that they could review the court record and interview Union officials associated with the battle between Bruce and Maloney. And clearly, the files don't reflect if that ever happened. It's also in this account that we get the most different factual depiction on what happened on the night of Bruce's murder. Quoting, "The only witness to the murder was Dr. Howard Lagerquist, who moved to California after returning from military service. Dr. Lagerquist testified that the night Ziegler was slain, the streetlights were unexplainedly out of order. The rest of his story followed the usual Chicago-style gangland assassination pattern. One man stepped out from behind a tree, pumped 5 shots into Ziegler, then entered a black sedan parked at the curb, motor running, headlights off, which contained a second man. The two drove off as Dr. Lagerquist ran to Ziegler, who died in his arms, trying to mutter a name." End quote. This account is the most different to all the other accounts we've seen. It says that Dr. Lagerquist said there were only 2 individuals and not 3. This is where we have the introduction of 5 shots instead of 3, and also potentially where I was getting a little bit confused where it says one man stepped out from behind a tree, giving the impression that he was hiding there. And this is where the conversation with Danny started. But now that we have so many other accounts to the contrary, I'm really thinking that this one is just slightly flawed. And I'm not assuming any ill will at this point in time on behalf of the eyewitness, who often can make mistakes in the face of a tragedy, or I'm not actually sure what he thought about this representation of his testimony in the public. As you know, I don't have the police files, so I don't know exactly what he said to the police at the time, and I don't know if what was being reported about what he said is accurate. We don't have any statements either way from him, so relying just on newspaper reporting makes this very difficult. But with so many accounts from the time saying something slightly different, I'm tending to believe that it was 3 shots instead of 5, and that there were in fact 3 people, 2 in the car and 1 who steps out. One more article from 1958, also from the Family Archive, of unknown publication. Quoting, "Dennis Bruce Ziegler, a common working stiff but a fighter against the mob, was the other. Arthur Madden and Clarence Converse, the income tax men who sent Al Capone to prison, related that Ziegler had come in with information about Maloney's income from Ziegler's home local in Chicago. Blah, 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 blah. But Madden and Converse had no power to protect Ziegler, and he was killed a few nights later as he approached his home. He had 11 children. Captain Daniel Gilbert of the Chicago cops reported the streetlights had been turned off. End quote. There was already an inquiry potentially into Maloney and others' tax papers in 1930 itself, so it's not something that Bruce newly started on his own in 1933. But I do think it's interesting that in the couple days leading up to his death, he makes contact with both of these individuals regarding Maloney's tax income. And we also have further confirmation that the streetlights had been turned off. Although we're obviously very skeptical of Captain Gilbert's account, that is also what my family members said the night of the murder, along with Dr. Lagerquist. And I have one final paper, the paper that I read first when I wanted to start this project. A Chicago Sun-Times article from February 14th of 1933. Valentine's massacre eclipses family's loss. Quoting, "The police detail was withdrawn in early February 1933, and 2 weeks later, on a night when the streetlights were out, Ziegler was killed. He stepped off a streetcar, headed home from work, and walked down the block. A gunman jumped out of a car and shot him 3 times in the head. The family heard the shots. Quote, my brother Jim said, 'Oh, there goes a car backfiring,' said Lucy Barnett, 72, another of the Ziegler children. But my mother said, 'Nope, that's your dad. Go run.' David Ziegler, who was 23 and the eldest son, ran out the door and down the sidewalk. He kneeled and cradled his father in his arms. The father tried to speak, but the son could not understand him. The father died. 9 months later, David died as well, ostensibly of a heart attack. But the family blames it on the shooting, saying David never recovered from that day. They didn't kill one, Christensen said. They killed 2. End quote. This article aligns much like the original Tribune reporting, although I do think it contains one potential factual inaccuracy. I believe the police detail was withdrawn at the end of 1932, and that's according to Edna herself in some articles in 1943 when she was interviewed. But there are a lot of articles saying that it could have been early February of 1933. So I'm going to take that one with a grain of salt for now. But otherwise, the fact pattern of what happened on the night Bruce was killed seems to line up with many of the others from 1933 itself. And I have to think, in reviewing this case and interviewing family members, that the individuals who looked into Bruce's murder had combed through the different factual counts as to what happened. And at this point, without the police records, and maybe even with them, or the coroner's inquest, we really won't know exactly what happened on that night. But based on what we reviewed today, I'm ready to make a call and talk again with Danny about what I think happened. And that's that I think there were 3, quote, gunmen, not 3 people who fired shots, that there were 3 people on the night of Bruce's murder. 1 person who fired shots at close range at him on the sidewalk and 2 in the car. I think they fired 3 shots and not 5. I think it can be both true that Bruce tried to say something to Lagerquist and David, who by my family's account ran out very quickly after the shots were fired. And I also think we can confirm that the streetlights were definitely out of order on the night of the murder, and it actually would have been quite easy to just clip a wire and turn them off. So the fact that the individuals were in the car and driving up to Bruce and then someone gets out, as opposed to waiting in behind a tree, I think opens up the timeline that they're the ones who potentially cut the lights and then drove towards where Bruce was walking on Tripp Avenue. I no longer think that there's a potential 4th person assigned just to the lights. By the fact that they're in the car makes them a lot more mobile. And in going through all these accounts, I didn't find one that said the lights came on immediately. So I assume someone from the city or the utility had to come and turn them back on. And in leading up to this next episode, where we're going to go over the final suspects on our list, I wanted to recap the events leading up to the murder as we've discussed them today, with one little addition. So we know about a month prior to the murder, Bruce stands up to William Green, the then president of the American Federation of Labor, the man he had been working with and corresponding with on the federal court case in D.C., and that Green casts him aside. 2 weeks prior to his murder, we know that Bruce asked for a police guard from Captain Daniel Gilbert. We also know that Bruce spoke with Steve Sumner about his increasing anxieties about what was going on and that he was fearing for his life. A few days prior to his murder, we know that Bruce spoke with income tax men at the U.S. Treasury Office, again indicating that he wanted help and protection, and from the state's attorney's office with Thomas Courtney, and that they were unable to provide it. We also know that he spoke with an attorney and his secretary at the Employers Association. Then, the night of the murder, we know Bruce spoke again with Steve Sumner, and that he seemed anxious. The day after the murder, we know that both Sam Alex and William Maloney had an arrest warrant out for questioning, one seemingly that was never actually filled. A week after the murder, Humphreys and Fischetti are questioned, and a week after that, 2 weeks after the murder, there are no more notations made in the police file regarding Bruce's murder. None. Apparently, the last entry was March 14, 1933, according to William Mooney in 1958. So all those statements about Gilbert and others saying they'd spoken to many people over the years and attempted to solve the murder were not reflected. And if there was a separate state's attorney's file to the police file that Mooney was not able to get, I wasn't able to get it either, as the state's attorney's office said they could not find one after reasonable search. And that's where we are as we approach the rest of our suspects in Bruce's murder. I'll see you next time in the rest.